when she apparently woke and remembered that she had homework due the next day that she didn't even start. She flicked her light on and began to work on it. The clock read exactly 1:15 a.m. Over the sound of pencil lead pushing onto the paper, there were faint noises coming from inside the walls. She stopped writing, and the sounds became more clear. It was as if something was being pushed from inside the walls. There was a storage space right next to her bed, with a big square door that comes off the wall to enter. The girl started screaming for her mom, and the noises suddenly became exaggerated, as if something were running in there. The door to the wall popped off, and a figure emerged. The girl's mother and father could hear the screams even through 3 closed doors. When the girl's father came to the room, he found a tall and overweight man covering the girl's mouth with his hand. The fight was over in a matter of seconds, with a few good punches to the man's gut. 2 pairs of the girl's underwear were found in the man's pocket before he was arrested. Me and my wife were spending the night together in Cedar Beach. Unfortunately, the place closes at 9:30, and the place was miles from basically anywhere. So we were pretty much stuck with nothing to do at the beach at 9:30 at night. So we just took a walk through the wet sand until 10. For the first half of the walk, we didn't see a single person on the whole beach. Then we turned around to head back. About 20 feet into us walking back in the direction we came, we both picked up on something. There were more than 2 pairs of footprints in the sand. Ours were more washed away by then, but there were 2 other sets of footprints that weren't there before. These a little more recent. They seemed to set off up away from the wet sand where there would be no more footprints. You may think it was just another couple taking a late night stroll, but we hadn't seen anyone for the good mile or 2 we walked, so we were spooked. I used the flashlight app on my iPhone to scan around the nearby dunes. I even went as far as calling out asking if somebody was there. I told my wife to wait there while I headed over to the garbage pails. It seemed like the only place somebody could be hiding. It was clear. I shined the light further down, revealing a tunnel that probably led to a parking lot. I moved closer until I could actually see a little into the tunnel, and as soon as I could, I shut the light off. There were 2 things in there. I don't even know if I should call them humans, because from what I saw, they looked like hunched, naked creatures huddled in there. They had skin to match that of a medium dark-skinned Caucasian, but with much more flaky, wrinkly skin. I didn't mutter a word. I just stomped through the sand to my wife, pulling her with me as we ran back in the direction of the car. We made it back to the car in about 5 minutes, completely out of breath. We got in the car, and I finally explained what I saw to my wife. She looked at me like I was crazy, and she still does. But can you blame her? I'm sure you're not even taking this seriously. I reported my sighting to the proper authorities the following day, and have been coming back to the beach at night once a week to try and find the creatures once more. I work as a night janitor at the local high school. I would 95% of the time be the only one working the night shift because there wasn't really a need for more than one. I always start with the downstairs classrooms and work my way up to the upstairs classrooms. The cafeteria, gym, auditorium, nurse's office, those were all responsibilities of the morning and afternoon guys. So since I was always alone, I would commonly have a bunch of radios sitting around the hallways playing loud music, like I did this one night. The upstairs of the school was shaped like a U rather than an O, so to go around to the other side, there was only one way. I was mopping the floor in one of the social studies classrooms when I noticed, from all the way across the other side of the school, the lights to one of the classrooms turned on. I don't mean it was left on. I always shut the lights to every room I wasn't in. I mean the lights turned on. I stood there with chills running through my body. There was somebody walking over to the window. They stopped and stared straight over to me through the window. It was the most disturbing thing I had ever witnessed. I didn't know what to do. Confront them? Run away? Call the police? I got closer to the window. It was somebody who looked like they were in their 30s or 40s. He had black hair, and I could see a lot of facial hair. He raised his hand and began slowly waving at me. I pulled the blinds to the room shut and tried to catch my breath. Tried to sort out my options. When I lifted the blinds back up, the light from the room across the school was off. My heart went back into panic mode. He was surely on his way over to this classroom. Right then, the option to run seemed best, and so I did. I ran down the stairs and out the back door of the school, not giving a second damn about anything but me and my life. Security cameras revealed that sometime in the night, the man emerged from the basement of the school and began wandering around. Getting a closer look at his face, I could see just how disturbed it made me feel. He was not a pleasant-looking man. The creepiest thing, though, was the camera revealed him going back down into the basement and never coming out. He was never found down there, though, which makes me question if there's some hidden rooms or exits down there. Lately, doing this job has never been more terrifying. I used to work as a house cleaner when I was a 17-year-old guy trying to save up for college. The person I worked for the longest was a man named Jeffrey. I only spoke with him once when I met him, and a few times in between when he came home early from his job. That was it. I couldn't tell you if he seemed normal or not. He had a very serious rule, though, not to go into his basement. He even left a big sign on the door. The curiosity ate away at me, but I did my best not to sneak any peeks. So one day, while I was dusting the furniture in his room, I just got a little snoopy and started going through his drawers. Don't ask me why. In his bigger drawers, there was just a bunch of clothing. I started going through the smaller drawers and found things like cameras, batteries, photo albums, and various knickknacks. Same thing in the middle drawer, but in the bottom one, I found a small wooden box sitting perfectly in the corner. It needed a key to open it, but I had actually taken notice to a small key that had been hanging on his keyring in the kitchen. It looked like it could fit in this lock. When I tried it, surely enough, the key twisted in the socket and opened the lock. What I found was disturbing. There was a pile of black and white photos. The first ones were just pictures of the house, but then eventually, I was in every single photo, in every single room of the house, including the bathroom. The most disturbing picture was a colored one that stood out from the rest. It was taken from outside one of the windows, aimed to me when I was in the kitchen. I put the pictures back in the box, except for a select few to use as possible evidence for something that I feared might happen. I locked it back up and put it in the drawer. I left everything else in the bedroom as is. I was about to leave the house and never return when I passed the basement door. Now that I wasn't coming back, I figured I should check out the basement so that the curiosity wouldn't forever eat away at me. I stepped inside and flicked the lights on. The air down there smelled really bad, like rotting animals. There were weird posters on the walls, a lot of erotic ones. I was shocked to even see some with boys and girls that looked under 18. There were 2 doors leading to either rooms or closets. I didn't go into them, but the horrid smell was the worst by those 2 doors. I finally realized there was a buzzing sound whenever I moved. I noticed in the corner there was a ceiling camera pointing right at me, but after noticing it, it seemed to stop moving completely. That was my cue to get out of that house. I drove home to safety. Jeffrey tried calling me one time after this. I didn't pick up. He didn't leave a message. I'm glad I never gave him my address. I was getting off from work at Stop and Shop after doing the midnight shift. When me and the only other guy working at the time went to our cars, a black pickup truck pulled up next to us. There was a man and woman inside. They looked like dirty hillbilly rednecks. The guy had a mustache and a beard, with a cap on and a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. The woman had dirty-looking hair. Then again, her whole face looked dirty. When they stopped in front of us, blocking our path, the guy sitting inside asked us if we have any spare change for gas. My coworker dug through his pockets and dropped 2 quarters in the man's hand. I handed him $1 in hopes that he would just drive off. The guy looked at the money in his hand, then looked back at us. "I'm gonna need more than that," he said. We apologized and told him that that's all we had. "Bullshit," he said. I could see my coworker was getting just as nervous as I was. The woman in the passenger seat had a devilish-looking smile on her face. I walked around their car and speed-walked to my car, as did my coworker. I could see the man was spinning his pickup truck around. I turned the car on and immediately put it in drive and sped out of the parking lot. They seemed to be following me at first, but I eventually lost them. I pulled into a gas station and texted my coworker to make sure he was alright. He texted back saying he was fine. I wish it ended there, but a pair of headlights entered the gas station. It was the pickup truck. I got back in my car. He tried to block me by pulling up in front of me. The woman in the car pulled a gun and started to lower the window. I yanked it in reverse right out of the parking lot. My back window cracked as it was hit by a bullet. I somehow managed to lose them once more and make it home alive. I found 2 more bullet marks on my car. It's so scary to think how close I was to dying. And for what? Unfortunately, there are so many messed up people in this world. Me and Andrew, my half-sister's cousin, were 18 years old at the time. We decided to go exploring in the abandoned asylum in our town. It was way past dark, there were no cars on the road, so it was probably after midnight. Andrew drove. We both brought our video cameras in hopes to catch some interesting footage. YouTube was only 2 or 3 years old at the time, and exploring abandoned places was a pretty big thing for YouTube videos back then, so we thought it would be cool. We had to crawl under a hole in the fence that someone else had cut. We both brought along flashlights, of course. We got in through one of the broken windows. There were a few planks on the floor by the window that had once been planked up against the window to prevent anyone from entering. We began our search, both flashlights on, along with Andrew's camera, which had night vision capabilities. There was nothing but broken glass and graffiti everywhere. There were a few cracks and holes in the wood floors that led to blackness below. We didn't dare shine our lights down there. We both shared a few laughs, but I was creeped out as hell in there, and I knew he was too. The place was huge. We ended up in a small room with a dental chair and other equipment. It was strangely unsettling. The most unsettling room upstairs, however, was the bathroom. When we were in there, we heard a constant dripping sound coming from one of the stalls. When we tried to open it, it was locked. The opening at the bottom was far too small to crawl through, so we just left that room in a hurry, very creeped out. Behind one door, we found a stairway leading upstairs or downstairs. We wanted the video to be as scary as possible, so of course, like 2 teenage guys would, we went downstairs. There was a new set of hallways, much more creepy now that we were underground. There was a bulletin board on the wall with a bunch of old photos and news articles on it. Me and Andrew were checking that out when a metallic thud came from down the hall. We shined our lights over in that direction, just in time to see what we were sure was a forehead moving from the hallway into one of the rooms. Andrew started screaming as we ran back in the direction we came. Now, I would have just thought it was a homeless person or something, but as we were stomping up the stairs, a single flight below us, we could hear steps following us. At this point, I was screaming too. The feeling of being in the back was horrifying. I felt that at any moment, I would be grabbed from behind and dragged down the stairs. But we made it back to the main hall, and down to the window that we entered from. We made it outside, and could hear through the window the door to the stairway opening from down the hall. We got to Andrew's car as fast as we could, and drove off, never looking back.
Oi, you! Shut your mouth and look at my wad! Loads of money!
This is a journey into money. Loads of money.
It's loads of money. L-O-D-S-O-V-E-M-O-N-E. What's they spell? Loads of money, probably.
Made a right load of finishing knowledge this week.
Right, lads, what's out for the ladies? Loads of, loads of, loads of. Money, money, money. Loads of, loads of, loads of. Money, money, money. Right, whop it out. What that? Loads of money. Whop it out. Loads of money.
Good evening and welcome to Loads of Money.
Doing up the house is my bread and butter. My bird's page free and my car's a nutter. Loads of money is a shout I utter as I wave my wand and the kids is in the gutter. Derek B on your bike.
This is an insult to our intelligence.
Shut your mouth.
Nurse, coming to tend to loads of money. He's got too much money.
Our ransom demand is $1 million. That's nothing. I'm on that in a day, probably. I'm more money in Stock Aitken and Dennis Waterman put together. Shum shum walla dash, bus bus 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 shum shum walla dash. Whop your what? Whop your what? Whop your what on the counter? Whop your what? Whop your what? Whop your what on the counter? Whop your what on the counter? Whop your what on the counter?
Boys certainly know how to do up the house, and they're taking home a pretty tidy pay packet too.
Shut your mouth.
So the final score, Manchester United 0, Loads of Money United, loads. That's a final score there.
Pump up the football, pump up the football.
Hey, check this out. Sorry, mate, don't take checks. Just loads of money. Sing a song of sixpence, a pocket full of dosh. Dibble, 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 bosh, bosh, bosh. Sing a song of sixpence, a pocket full of dosh. Dibble, 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 bosh, bosh, bosh. Sing a song of sixpence, a pocket full of dosh. Dibble, 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 dibble.
Sure. Skip this ad, just like you skipped out on buying Amazon stock and Google.
We were a young couple that had just moved into a new house. We had a bedroom on the first floor. The house had an upstairs, a middle floor, and a den, no basement. At night, we started hearing strange noises coming from below us. I checked under the bed, nothing was there. The sound seemed to be coming from beneath the floor, but the house didn't have a basement, so it didn't make sense. We started to notice things were different in the morning, like certain doors were opened that we were sure had been shut the previous night. My wife's closet door always seemed to be open. We made sure to shut all the windows one night just to make sure it wasn't some kind of draft. The doors were all open the next morning. We had decided that it had gone far enough. The next night, we both stayed up, listening and waiting. The noises coming from below were louder than ever. Sounds like things being pushed around, moaning. I headed down to the den and put my ear against the wall, listening for where the sound may be coming from. It was coming from inside the wall I was up against, but a little lower down, below the den. I went back to my wife. I told her we had to stay up for as long as possible and see what happens. We stayed up until around 2. My wife started to drift off, and I guess I had shortly after. I woke to my wife shaking me, silently crying to herself. She pointed at her closet, which had been opened. There was some kind of hidden door propped open in her closet. It led down into the floor. I hopped out of bed and shined a light down there. It was a ladder leading far down to some hidden room. I had my wife lock the door and call the police while I took my machete with me down into the secret room. When I got to the bottom, I found a light switch. The room had a table and chair, a small cot in the corner, and a bunch of toys scattered across the room. A scream came from upstairs. It was my wife. Somebody was trying to break down the door. I climbed up the ladder the best I could while holding the machete. By the time I got up there, they had already kicked in part of the door. They stuck their head through a hole in the door and looked at me. He was a dirty-looking man. I saw craze in his red eyes. He must have seen my machete because he ran straight out the front door. I don't know what the room is for, maybe some kind of old bomb shelter or something. But I don't know who the hell that man was, how the hell he got down there, and how long he's been down there. I was 27 years old, moving out to live with my girlfriend in an apartment. It wasn't the fanciest place ever, as we weren't the wealthiest couple ever, but it was fine for us. The first night in, we already hated the neighbor. There was yelling and thumping going on all night. It was like they didn't sleep all night. My girlfriend wanted me to go over. I told her if it continued the next night, I would go over. We didn't hear anything of them throughout the day while setting up furniture, but when night came and we were trying to get some sleep, the freakish yelling and banging resumed, sometimes even bangs on the wall. I decided to draw the line and confront them. I knocked on the door, and a middle-aged albino woman answered the door. Her voice was raspy, as if she'd been smoking cigarettes for the past 40 years. I politely asked her to quiet down. She told me to back off and mind my own business before slamming the door in my face. The noises and yelling only got louder after this. My wife said we should report them. I went to the front desk the following day, bringing up the couple that lives in that apartment. The doorman looked puzzled. He told me that only a woman named Kathy lived there. Her husband passed away 5 years ago. She was written down as only being one person in that room, so she was breaking a rule of the apartment building. The doorman went to go check out the room. The woman let him search the apartment. He came back to tell me that she was all alone in there, which seemed so odd. He did, however, ask her to keep it down. I thanked him and went back to the room. It seemed it had worked, as there weren't any sounds that night. I woke to see somebody standing by our bed. "Anna?" I whispered. My wife turned next to me. She was in the bed. The familiar raspy voice at the end of the bed said we shouldn't have reported her. I screamed and fumbled for the light switch. My wife started screaming even louder. By the time I turned on the lamp, she was gone. I slipped on my shoes and ran out into the halls in my robe looking for her. Her apartment door was open, but she wasn't in there. Where could she have gone so fast? Nothing was heard of Kathy for a whole week, before one night, there were 4 loud knocks on our walls. Not thumps like the previous noises. These were actual knocks, meant to get our attention. We moved out a day later. Before he had the time to catch the number to call, the TV switched off, and Ayana was standing behind him with the remote in her hand. Rita had freaked out, crying and screaming. Ayana held him, but a few years ago, something very weird happened with my best friend and I. I was 15 years old. One night I decided to sleep over at my friend's house. After a night of scary movies, we were in the mood to do something exciting. Not far from my friend's house was a demolishing site, a block of houses in a very terrible state that would be demolished the day after tomorrow. The local government would demolish them to make room for new houses. The whole site was fenced in and warning signs saying "Do not enter" hung everywhere. The houses were boarded up by planks. Doors and windows were sealed shut. No one could get in. We decided to go for a walk on the old block and take some random photographs. My friend knew a spot where we could enter the old block. When we walked there, we noticed that every house was boarded up tight, so we couldn't get in. We noticed a house with a window on the top floor that wasn't very well boarded up. We could see into the room. We took a photo with a digital camera. Later, we went home and took a look at the pictures we made. Suddenly, we came across the photo of the window. We saw a woman dressed in a brown raincoat with white skin and black hair as long as we could visibly see. The woman looked very sad. We hadn't seen any woman up there when we took the picture. Moreover, the windows and doors were boarded. We went back to the house to see if that was correct. After investigation, it really was. Everything was tied shut, and there was no woman. This story isn't mine, but rather of my friend from Japan. I'll call him Rita. It happened back when Rita was only about 11 or 12 years old. Rita was a rather attractive kid and had his fair share of admirers. One girl was extreme with her crush though. I'll call her Ayano. Ayano was a lot older than Rita. She was 17. She was an acquaintance of Rita and lived down the road from him. Rita hadn't thought much of her until she started stalking him. Every day and every night, she would be following him one way or another, whether it be in person or online. Rita first started getting the creeps when she would start messaging him over 20 times a day. Stuff like, "Be safe," "Are you alright?" "Sleep well," etc. This was a little weird, but he overlooked it. Then the messages started getting creepier. Instead of the usual checkup emails, they got more personal. Things like, "You should eat your lunch," if he skipped lunch, or "I think your sister is hungry," when his little sister was crying. Rita stopped using both his phone and social media at this point, but it doesn't end there. Rita's mother was almost never home, so he was frequently looked after by babysitters. One day he had a new babysitter. It was Ayano. Nothing was particularly strange as she looked after him and his siblings, but she did get a lot closer to his mother than he would like. One day at school, Ayano approached Rita and told him that his mother would be out of the country for a week, and that she told her to let Rita stay at her house. Rita was hesitant at first, but hey, it was his mother's wish. He couldn't go against that. Ayano told him that his mother had already left, so he could go home with her after school that day. Rita reluctantly agreed and went home with her. When he got there, her parents weren't home. Things get a little blurry here as my friend choked up telling the story, as it still scares him today. He said Ayano would play weird games with him, stuff like Family, where she insisted she was the wife and he was the husband, as well as things like Cops and Robbers and games to see who would get scared first, where she would blindfold him and leave him in a silent room for hours on end. It was 5 days into staying at her house, and Ayano had gone to her part-time job. She had left the doors locked and the windows were too high to jump from, so he just stayed in front of the TV, where he saw a chilling news report. It was a missing child report, the missing child being him. Before he had the time to catch the number to call, the TV switched off, and Ayano was standing behind him with the remote in her hand. Rita had freaked out, crying and screaming. Ayano held him, but he managed to wiggle from her grasp just in time to open a window and cry for help. Luckily for him, a couple were walking past, heard his cries and called the police. Within an hour, police arrived and found him locked in her bedroom with a blindfold and his hands tied. Due to Ayano still being a minor, Rita is unsure of what happened to her. He says he only remembers the police taking her away while his mother was hugging him. He moved to Australia after this and hasn't seen his kidnapper since, but he still cowers at the sound of her name. About 5 years ago, I lived downtown in a major city in the US. I've always been a night person, so I would often find myself bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, went to sleep. To pass the time, I used to go for long walks and spend the time thinking. I spent 4 years like that, walking alone at night, and never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommates that even the drug dealers in the city were polite. But all that changed in just a few minutes of one evening. It was a Wednesday, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, and I was walking near a police-patrolled park quite a ways from my apartment. It was a quiet night, even for a weeknight, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The park, as it was most nights, was completely empty. I went down a short side street in order to loop back down my apartment when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street, on my side, was the silhouette of a man dancing. It was a strange dance, similar to a waltz, but he finished each box with an odd forward stride. I guess you could say he was dance walking, headed straight for me. Deciding he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass me. The closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky and wearing an old suit. He danced closer still until I could make out his face. His eyes were open wide and wild, head tilted back slightly, looking off at the sky. His mouth was formed in a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. Between the eyes and the smile, I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer. I took my eyes off of him to cross the empty street. As I reached the other side, I glanced back, and then stopped dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me, but still looking skyward, smile still wide on his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. I started walking again, but kept my eyes on the man. He didn't move. Once I had put about half a block between us, I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. The street and sidewalk ahead of me were completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to where he had been standing to find him gone. For the briefest of moments, I felt relieved, until I noticed him. He had crossed the street and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure due to the distance and the shadows, but I was certain he was facing me. I had looked away from him for no more than 10 seconds, so it was clear that he had moved fast. I was so shocked and I stood there for some time, staring at him, and then he started moving toward me again. He took giant, exaggerated tiptoed steps, as if he were a cartoon character sneaking up on someone, except he was moving very, very quickly. I'd like to say at this point that I ran away or pulled out my pepper spray or cell phone or anything at all, but I didn't. I just stood there, completely frozen, as the smiling man crept toward me, and then he stopped again, about a car length away from me, still smiling his smile, still looking to the sky. When I finally found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What I meant to ask was, "What the fuck do you want?" in an angry, commanding tone. What came out was a whimper. What the fuck? Regardless of whether or not humans can smell fear, they can certainly hear it. I heard it in my own voice, and that only made me more afraid. But he didn't react to it at all. He just stood there, smiling. And then, after what felt like forever, he turned around, very slowly, and started dance walking away. Just like that. Not wanting to turn my back to him again, I just watched him go, until he was far enough away to almost be out of sight. And then I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape of him got bigger and bigger, was coming back my way. He was coming back my way, and this time he was running. I ran too. I ran until I was off the side road and back onto a better lit road with sparse traffic. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of my way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see his stupid smile, but he was never there. I lived in that city for 6 months after that, and I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk. He didn't look high. He looked completely and utterly insane. And that's a very, very scary thing to see. In the mid-80s, my mom was a cleaner in Australia. She would clean houses in suburban areas and would sometimes do houses in rural or wine regions. She would leave business cards at the local shops and got most of her business this way, and some through referrals and word of mouth. One day she got a call from a lady who sounded like she was around 60, asking Mom to clean her old farmhouse. She made a lot of odd demands, and Mom would usually meet clients before taking on new business. In this case, the lady did not want to meet my mom and said she would leave the keys under the front doormat. Mom agreed, mainly because the lady was quite obviously wealthy and was offering to pay Mom substantially more than she would reasonably expect. Mom went to the house on a Monday morning and said she already felt unnerved by the long driveway. The house was essentially in the middle of a very large and very empty property. She found the keys and started cleaning. About an hour into the clean, she hears the back door shut. Mom was told no one would be at the house, so she immediately felt unsafe. She stood frozen in the kitchen for what she said felt like 3 or 4 minutes, although she said it could have been much longer. There was no other car on the property. She wanted to leave immediately, but had 2 rooms left to do. Both were bedrooms. She said as time passed and she heard nothing else, she decided that perhaps it was nothing, or perhaps something had fallen and it wasn't the door after all. She walked up the hallway and stepped into the bedroom. All over the bed were black and white photos. As Mom got closer, she realized that the photos were all of her. Some were taken at our family home, and others were taken at other houses Mom would clean. Some through windows or over fences. She used the house phone to call the police and immediately drove to the end of the driveway. The lady ended up being investigated, but continued to claim that it was a break-in. After some time, the police stopped with their searching and we ended up moving to a new town 4 months later. I'm 22, and this incident happened a 1.5 years ago. I had just moved into my first apartment and was in the process of moving in. The door that led to my apartment locks itself automatically when closed. So, I was going to the entrance of the apartment complex to get my mail while talking on the phone with my friend. I returned to the apartment and sat on the bed while opening the mail while using the phone. I dropped the phone on the floor and it landed under the bed, so I had to lie on the floor and stretch for it. I saw something that caught my eye. There was someone under my bed. My eyes widened and I choked the urge to scream. The person under my bed was lying still with his back towards me and his head to his chest, so I couldn't see his face, and he didn't see me. Trying to be rational while so many thoughts rushed through my head, I picked up the phone, said, "Sorry, I dropped my phone. I'm just gonna take a shower and call you back." The bathroom is right by my bed, so I hastily walked in, quietly locked the door, turned the shower on, jumped out my window, and called the police. They told me to wait nearby, but to go across the street and see if anybody comes out the door of the apartment complex. This was during the summer and it was still light out. I placed myself across the street, hiding behind a car while watching my open bathroom window and the entry door. I called my friend and he came over just before the police. I gave them my keys and they went inside. Only moments later, 2 cops came out holding a thin and tired-looking man. His eyes looked crazy, but he didn't try to get away. The policeman that stood beside me and comforted me while the police searched through my house told me that the man stood outside my bathroom door with one of my kitchen knives, waiting for me to come out. This man had somehow crept in my entry door while I was getting my mail and hid under the bed. The man that was trying to hurt me turned out to be a homeless person and was placed in a mental hospital. When I was 21, me and my girlfriend were upstate in my family's vacation mobile home. It was during a snowstorm and we were sitting on the couch next to the heater, snuggling and watching late night TV. We were surrounded by absolutely nothing but forest in all directions, and all that was keeping us from the outside was a wooden door that had a broken lock. The last time my grandparents came up, my grandpa put a few cinder blocks by the door to use as a kind of barrier in the meantime, since the door opened inwards. Anyway, while we were watching TV, my girlfriend started shaking me, telling me she heard something outside. I assured her it was most likely a deer or a bear or something, but then 5 minutes later, my girlfriend looked at me again. I heard it too. I muted the TV so we could hear it better. It sounded like someone was messing around in the little lawnmower shed outside. My car was parked outside and all the lights were on inside. If there was anybody out there, they knew we were inside. My girlfriend was urging me to go outside and check it out, but I told her she must be crazy to think that I was going out there. The sound stopped and there was nothing but the sound of the storm outside now. After a few minutes, I felt it safe to shut the inside lights and open the blinds to take a quick look outside, but it was too dark to see anything. I turned on the porch light and I was able to see a good portion of the front yard outside. There were footprints in the snow. Not animal footprints. They were clearly shoe prints, and they were headed in the direction of the backyard. I went to open the curtains to the backyard window, and when I did, I felt the urge to scream, but my girlfriend did instead. Even though there were no lights in the backyard, we could see a man dressed in all black and wearing a vendetta mask facing the window. I immediately shut the blinds and told my girlfriend to go hide in the bedroom, while I grabbed my grandpa's hunting rifle out of the closet. I pushed the cinder blocks and a bunch of other heavy objects in front of the door as a barricade, shut all the blinds and lights, and went to hide with my girlfriend in the corner of the bedroom. There was a bang at the front door. He was trying to bust open the door. I don't even think he tried the knob, but it didn't matter either way. After a few futile bangs to the door, it seems the man finally gave up. I stayed up that whole night with the gun by my side while my girlfriend slept. We packed and left first thing in the morning, but the scary thing, there was a fresh set of footprints leading from the front yard window out into the woods. I haven't been up there since, but my grandparents have, and they said that there was no sign of a break-in or anything missing. I don't plan on ever going back up there. Back when my grandma was still alive, I would always walk down the block to her house every day to help with various chores. There was this one day that I walked over to her house the same time I always did and decided to let myself in. I was surprised she left the door unlocked. She was a very paranoid old lady and normally kept everything locked. I saw her bedroom door was opened upstairs and I heard her opening and closing drawers and cabinets. I walked upstairs calling Grandma, and as I was about 5 feet from the door, she slammed her bedroom door shut. I knocked, asking if everything was alright, and at that moment my cell phone began to ring. It was my grandma's phone number. I was so confused, but I picked up the phone anyway. My grandma was on the other end, telling me not to come over that day, as she was walking over to her seniors club. I felt my heart skip a beat as she told me this. I hung up the phone before she could say anything else, remaining silent. I knew exactly what was going on. I played dumb and said, "Grandma, I'll be downstairs," and made my way to my grandma's kitchen to grab a knife and dial 911. It remained silent in the bedroom after what happened. The police arrived and burst into the bedroom, and the loud and sudden bang of a gunshot caught me off guard. When the paramedics arrived and wheeled out the intruder, I recognized the man's face. It was my grandma's next-door neighbor. Apparently, he saw that my grandmother had left the house and broke in to look for jewelry. And when the police broke into the bedroom, they found the man hiding next to the door with a large knife in hand. If I had walked into that bedroom, I would have been as good as dead. The most haunting memory of my life. Me and my wife were getting home from dinner out, and as soon as we stepped out of the car, we noticed that our front door to our house was open. I told my wife to wait outside while I ran inside and ran straight up to our bedroom where I hid the shotgun. I loaded the gun and scanned every single room upstairs. There was no sign of anybody. I made my way down to scanning the main floor, followed by the basement. There was no sign of anybody, and there was nothing missing or moved. I called the cops, and when they arrived, I told them what happened, and they began to investigate some rooms upstairs, followed by the basement. Nothing was turned up. They made a case of asking us if we were positive that we shut the door when we left. I myself was starting to have doubts, not completely sure if I had, but my wife remained confident that we had shut the door. The police seemed sure that if somebody had broken in, they didn't stick around long, as there didn't seem to be any signs of burglary. My wife was worried sick, crying that she wasn't comfortable being in the house. I comforted her the best I could, assuring her that whoever broke in the house left in a hurry. I finally fell asleep after hours of rolling around in the bed, but my sleep was immediately cut short by the disturbing scream of my wife. I looked at her, and she was staring intently in the direction of the closet. It hit me like a bullet just then. I had forgotten to check the second closet. I looked over and saw for the briefest second a man poking his head out of the closet before closing the closet door. Within 5 seconds, I had the shotgun loaded in hand and cocked it back to let the intruder know that I was armed. I screamed for him to come out, and just like that, the closet door opened, but instead of showing submission, he made a mad dash for the front door of the house. I could have shot him, but I didn't have it in me. He was never caught. He got away with it scot-free. I think having that gun saved us from a terrible fate. About a year ago, while still living under my parents' roof, I started experiencing some weird occurrences in my house, specifically my bedroom. While I was laying awake in my bed one late night, I heard a creaking sound coming from across the bedroom. My closet door had somehow been opened. When I got up to check it, I subconsciously checked for anybody inside my closet, even though I was 26 years old. Of course there was nobody inside, so I shut the door and went back to bed. Later that same night, I would hear rumbly, rattling noises coming from up above the ceiling. It sounded like something in the air ducts. It was a very strange sound. I really had no idea what to think about it, but as soon as it stopped, I kind of forgot about it quickly and fell asleep. In the morning, I did tell my dad about sounds in the attic the previous night, but annoyingly, he didn't seem too interested, or he just didn't take me very seriously. That night, I again lay in my bed awake, reflecting on life, when yet again, the slow creak of the closet door creeping open broke the silence. This time, I felt genuinely afraid. I knew the door was completely shut. It would take somebody twisting the doorknob for it to be able to push open. This time I took an extra careful look inside the closet for anybody, even though it wasn't a big closet and there really wasn't anywhere somebody could hide. I rationalized it as being a broken doorknob or something, and that same night, I again heard the rattling sounds coming from above the ceiling. It was exactly what happened the previous night. The next morning I convinced my dad to take a look at my closet door, but he quickly determined that the door was fine. When it was closed, he pulled on it, and it showed no signs of coming off the latch. Of course, he suggested that I was simply leaving the door unlatched, but I knew I wasn't. That night, I sat up, waiting for it to happen again, and right on cue, the closet door creaked open. I waited for the sounds above the ceiling, but there was just a long silence. I turned on my lamp and looked up to the air vents in my room, and I screamed at the top of my lungs. I could distinctly see two wide-open eyes peering through the vents at me. My parents barged into my room asking if I had gone insane. I explained everything, and they looked at each other like I had completely lost it. Not surprisingly, they dismissed it as a dream or the fact that I was too tired and was seeing things. They even began to lecture me about staying up too late. But to this day, I know I hadn't imagined it. It was too real. And the closet opening routinely? I know for a fact that wasn't in my imagination. I've never been a believer in the paranormal, but I still have absolutely no other explanation for those 3 nights. I live in the Poconos with my wife and kids. There's a small lake about a quarter mile away from our backyard. I commonly take my kids down there to go swimming. Up until last week, that is. Now, I'm never letting them go down there again. I haven't told anyone about this in fear of sounding crazy. It was last Saturday. We went over to the lake and set up our chairs on the sand. It's like a little private beach in our own backyard. It's been amazing. Me and my wife sat in our beach chairs enjoying the sun while our kids were splashing around in the water. I always tell them not to go too deep. They're still young, 6 and 8. We sat there for a good 2 hours that day. Neither of us were in the mood to get wet. Eventually, my wife got tired and decided to walk back home. I agreed to stay with the kids a little while longer, as they were somehow still having so much fun playing in the sand and water. The sun was setting at this point, and I was getting tired. They were going a little too deep, so I called at them to come back closer to the shore. They couldn't hear me apparently, so I stood up and got closer. Before I could call them again, I noticed something in the water. It looked like a black, roundish object, and it was moving closer to my kids. I ran into the water closer to my kids, calling them to come out. When they got close enough, I dragged them out myself. When I turned back to the water, the object was gone. My kids were confused as hell. I didn't know what to tell them, so I just told them it was time to go home. We packed up and walked back to the house, but I wasn't happy when I got home. I was uncomfortable with what I just saw. That thing looked like no sea creature known to man. Dinner was waiting for us when we got home. I ate really slow, thinking about the object in the water and whether or not to tell my wife. My wife asked me what's wrong. She noticed that I was eating slow. I decided not to tell her right then. After dinner, I took a flashlight with me and walked back down to the lake. By then, it was already dark out. I got to the lake, but to be honest, I didn't even know what I was expecting to find. I shined the flashlight all around the surface of the water, searching for the black object. And just then, I heard a large splash come from somewhere in the lake. The kind of splash of something emerging out of the water. I thought it might be some kind of animal in the lake. I shined the light all over the place, searching for the source of the sound. And then I found it. And I realized I was dead wrong. There was a silhouette of a humanoid figure with long black hair covering its whole face. It just stood there, facing me, but not staring at me. Not that I could tell. I dropped the flashlight in horror and sprinted all the way back up to my house, slamming the door shut behind me. I haven't told anybody about this. What kills me is that lake is only a quarter mile away from my house, and for all I know, that thing could be watching me through my window right now as I write this.
If you manage a team, you should be using Monday.com. It's a platform to manage any team and any project.
This happened to my dad when he was a little kid. I think it messed him up a bit emotionally, but he never admitted it. This story freaks me out just imagining it. So I'm pretty sure my dad was 10 years old and he was home alone for whatever reason. He was watching TV in the living room. It was the only TV in the house, and all of a sudden, the TV just shut off. So he got up and turned it back on. It was an old shitty TV, so it wasn't weird at all. When he got back on his couch, it happened again. He got up once again and turned the TV back on, and again it turned off. He repeated this process a couple more times before he started to look for the remote. While looking for the remote, he walked over to check behind one of the couches and saw a man hiding in the corner, holding the TV remote. My dad described the man as having long, messy hair and a crazed look in his eyes. He gave my dad a smile, and my dad ran out the front door screaming like a little girl. He went to his neighbors, who called the police. The man was still in the house when the police got there, so he was arrested. My dad told me that he still assumes the man was either homeless or crazy. Either way, this story is downright terrifying. My friend told me about something that happened to her when she was younger, about 8 or 9. She was walking home from school and got her key out to let herself into the house. Her single mom worked and came home later on weekdays. As she reached up to put the key in the door, her mom opened it in a dressing gown, having left work sick. Instead of greeting her, she looked straight past my friend and immediately said, "Who are you?" My friend turned around, and a man in a long coat hurried back down the path and down the street. Being ill that day had possibly saved her daughter from something potentially horrible happening to her. Before I start this story, I want to note that Jacob's mother is a drug addict, and his father really didn't have much wrong with him outside of being with his mother. So one night, when Jacob and his father were asleep, they heard a series of loud banging, scratching, and moving noises coming from the mother's room. Jacob's father jumped out of the bed and ran down the hall and started slamming on the door. His mother opened it, yelling at him to quiet down and that he woke her up. He asked her about the sounds. She hadn't been awake to hear them. Jacob's dad would have assumed that she was on something again, but something was wrong. The window was open all the way, and the TV was moved across the room, still plugged in, and had the screen facing outside. Jacob's dad was reasonably scared. He shut the window, got his bat, locked the mother's room from the outside, and made her sleep in the living room. He stayed up most of the night. He woke up Jacob at 5. It was still dark out. Jacob went out to the kitchen where his mother already was. A couple minutes later, his dad walked in, wide-eyed. He pointed at Jacob and his mother and held his finger to his lips. They both quieted down. They heard something shuffling around on the roof, going from edge to edge. Jacob's dad had the bat. They sat together in the room, quietly. Minutes later, the sound went away. Jacob's grandmother was called. She was asked if everybody could stay over there for a little while. She said yes and told them she'd come pick them up. Jacob finished eating and went to go sit on the couch. There was no TV in that room, so he sat in silence. He looked over at a door to an empty room in the hallway. The door was open. There was a finger wrapped around the side of it. Jacob screamed and pointed to it, and his father grabbed him and ran out. Jacob's mother followed behind. They went to a gas station and sat out front until they saw Jacob's grandmother's truck. Jacob described how unnatural the finger looked to me. He said it reminded him a little bit of a foam finger in length and width. It was wrapped clear around the door frame, the door itself being latched on the opposite side. They didn't go back to that house much after that. Once they'd gotten everything out of it, they never went back again. Nothing was stolen, and the window in the empty room was open. I was 13 years old. I had the most isolated bedroom imaginable. Mix that with a wild imagination, and I was often up late at night, scared and paranoid, unable to fall asleep. My bedroom was a separate floor of the house, on the opposite side of my parents' room. They had no way of hearing what was going on in my room. So it was a seemingly ordinary night, with a bit of rain, but not a storm. I woke up and looked at my clock and saw that it was 2 in the morning. I got an uncomfortable feeling right away, but I didn't know why. I then saw at the edge of my bed, there was a shadow of something roundish just over the head of the edge of my bed. My heart started racing until I realized it was just my hat. I sometimes hung my hat on one of the wooden poles at the edge of my bed, so I calmed myself down and fell back asleep. I woke up again around half an hour later and was again startled by the sight of the shadow at the end of my bed. But after my brain started to fully wake up, I remembered it was just my hat again. This process happened one more time that night, probably another half hour later, and once again, I was startled by the sight of the shadow. I was getting thirsty, so I reached my hand down to the side of my bed, looking for my water bottle, but I instead found something else. My hat. And at that instant, I felt my heart drop into my stomach, as I almost fell out of my bed trying to turn the lamp on. The light revealed the face of a man, peering over the edge of my bed, staring right into my eyes. I let out the highest pitched scream a boy could possibly produce, and ran straight past the man and down the stairs of my room. I felt the man try to grab me, but I managed to open the door and run to my parents' room to get my dad. My dad got the baton from under his bed and raced to my room, but he was too late. When we got back to my room, the window was wide open. Apparently the man jumped out onto the patio roof outside my window. When I was a kid, I had a huge group of friends that all happened to be on my block. On the weekend nights, we would always play manhunt, aka hide and go seek for older people. It worked out great because since we were all neighbors, we used all the front and backyards and even the woods behind our houses. We had a rule though, that we couldn't go out more than a backyard's length into the woods. I always used the same hiding spot, and nobody ever found me. I always hid behind an old rusty barrel that was thrown into the woods years ago. So on this particular night, there were only 6 of us playing. My friends Joe and Raj were on my team. We quickly dispersed as we were the first to hide. I ran to my usual hiding spot, through my backyard into the woods behind the barrel. Usually I would see the flashlights of the other team shining through the backyards in the woods, but it was unusually quiet this time. And then, I finally heard footsteps nearby. I didn't see a flashlight, so I assumed it was one of my teammates. I whispered Joe and Raj's names, but then whoever it was started charging at me, full on sprinting. I immediately shot up and ran out of the woods to find a new hiding spot in my backyard, but nobody ever came out of the woods. I heard all my friends calling my name from out front, including Joe and Raj, so I assumed something was wrong and went up front. I saw Joe's parents talking with my parents, with all my friends surrounding. My parents seemed a bit relieved to see me, so I was naturally really confused. They told me that a police officer had just passed by and warned them about a serial rapist spotted in the area and that all the kids should stay indoors. I explained what happened to me in the woods, and my parents started freaking out, making 100% sure that I wasn't lying. They called the police. I really don't know if he was ever caught, but I really hope he was. I try not to think about what would have happened to me had whoever that was caught me. When I was maybe 12 or 13, me, my mom, my stepdad, and 2 dogs went to the beach for a weekend. We rented an apartment all the way at the back of the shore. The apartment had nothing surreal to it at first sight. We unpacked everything and went out for dinner straight afterwards. We came back and at the time it was maybe 9 p.m. We watched some TV for an hour or so. My mom, stepdad, and 2 dogs slept on a bed you could make from the couch. They gave me the bedroom with a king-sized bed. I went to bed and used my computer for a while to play some games that I had pre-installed since I knew that there would be no internet connection there. I stayed up playing games pretty late at night. I decided it was time to get some shut-eye and go to sleep. Maybe after 5 minutes of laying in my bed, complete silence filled the room. But then, all of a sudden, I hear this extremely loud sigh. I knew it wasn't my parents or the dogs considering the door to the living room was closed. I straight bolted from that room and went to sleep in the bedroom opposite of the master bedroom. My heart was pounding so fast because I was absolutely petrified. Needless to say, no sleep was had that night. I told my parents about it the next morning, and they told me it was probably just my imagination, but I was certain it was not. This story still gives me nightmares to this day. I was staying with one of my best friends in North Carolina where I had a job interview. I was coming from New Jersey, and my friend Mike offered to let me crash at his place for a few days. He didn't necessarily live too close to the company I was interviewing for, about 2 hours away, but I also just wanted to see one of my good friends again. So this happened after the second interview. I came back to Mike's place in a good mood as I had been offered the job on the spot. We celebrated in the yard that night with a few friends and a few beers, or a lot of beers. We stayed up late and basically got shit-faced. People were coming and going all night. That's the kind of person Mike is. He didn't really keep track of who entered and left his house. So at about 4 in the morning, after everyone had left, we called it a night. I struggled to make it up the stairs and to the bathroom. I drained the snake and soaked my face with hot water, and it was at that moment that I thought I could see something in the corner of my eye. I turned to the half-open door and saw an eye poking in at me through the crack of the door. I let out a loud, holy shit, and in my drunken, klutzy state, I fell to the floor. When I got back on my feet, the eye was gone. I stumbled out of the bathroom and called Mike's name. I heard him call out in response from downstairs in the kitchen. It couldn't have possibly been him. I didn't hear anyone go down the stairs. But I asked if he was up there anyway. Expectedly, he replied with a no. I can't remember fully, but I assume I just brushed it off under the assumption that I had too much to drink. I made it to the guest bedroom and basically fell onto the bed, barely managing to throw the covers over myself. You know when you're drunk you fall asleep easier. That's an understatement. I think I fell asleep seconds after falling onto that bed, only to wake up after an unknown duration of sleep. I immediately felt the unbearable headache coming on, and began to rub my head. It was probably a little before sunrise. The room was a bit chilly. My foot was sticking out of the covers, hanging over the edge of the bed. And then it happened. I felt something extremely cold grab onto my foot and start stroking it. I then heard a raspy voice whisper the words, "Can you help me?" I sat up and screamed at the top of my lungs before sprinting out of the bed and out of the room, meeting Mike at the top of the stairs. I called the police and they arrived shortly. The intruder was actually a woman in her late 40s who clearly suffered from some kind of addiction. She admitted to simply walking right into Mike's house and hiding in a closet. The eye I saw was hers, peeking at me while in the bathroom. I always make sure to cover my feet with my sheets now. It was the dead of winter in Cali. Me and a couple buddies were on a skiing trip by South Lake Tahoe. We stayed in a big luxurious log cabin for a few nights. On the third night during a blizzard, I got up to get a glass of water late in the night. As I crossed the cabin over to the kitchen, there was a frantic knock at the door. I was a bit spooked that somebody would be knocking this late. I thought maybe I should just ignore it and let them go away. But I realized they knew we were there, as my car was parked right outside. I also had the thought that maybe somebody was in trouble and needed to get out of the dangerous weather. I tiptoed over to the door and waited for another knock. It didn't take too long before the knocking came again, this time much louder and more frantic. "Who is it?" I asked. Nobody answered. I asked again louder, but there was still no answer. After I asked this, there was no more knocking. I grew curious and eventually opened the door a crack with the chain lock still on just in case. Nobody was outside. I undid the lock and opened the door completely. There were footprints in the snow leading away from the cabin. For whatever stupid reason, maybe I felt some kind of guilt and worry for a person in need. I slipped on my boots and jacket and stepped out into the storm to follow the footsteps before they were completely filled. The footsteps led me to the edge of the property before completely stopping. I shit you not, the footprints completely ended, not a sign of vehicle marks, a struggle, nothing. It was as if whoever made the tracks was standing still, right where I was. I felt disturbed and ran back into the cabin and slammed the door shut behind me, making sure to lock it. Before I could even gather my thoughts, the frantic knocking at the door resumed. My heart started pounding, and I started to scream for my friends. One by one, they all rushed down to see what was wrong. When we opened the door, there was nobody there. The footprints were already filled. I never could prove what happened to my friends. I don't blame them for not believing me. I almost don't believe myself, but I know it happened. I just can't even try to explain it. It still freaks me out to this day. My friend and I were going to a party a few hours out of town, so we decided to stay at her family's holiday house about an hour south of the party. We arrived around mid-afternoon, and it was winter in a holiday town, so the area was completely empty. No other cars on the street. When we left for the party, I spent a moment deciding whether to pull the gate all the way closed. I'd had some trouble opening it earlier when we arrived, and if we were getting home late at night, I didn't want to be stuck outside. I ended up deciding to shut it for security. The party was great. We got back to the house around 12:30, and the gate was open. I immediately felt on edge because not only did I know that I had locked it, but I knew it couldn't just blow open in the wind. But I didn't want to make a big deal, so I was vague when my friend asked me if I'd shut it. We went inside and decided to make a snack. I was wandering through the house when suddenly my friend raced from the kitchen into the hallway and virtually tackled me to the ground. She was convinced she'd heard someone walking around outside. We tried to calm ourselves down, but we had no cell reception and there was no one else around. Over the next half hour or so, as we sat in the hallway paralyzed with fear, we heard footsteps outside and the back door being jimmied. We decided we had to leave, so we gathered everything up and got ready to make a break for the car. Just as we were at the front door ready to leave, there was a huge bang in the backyard, and suddenly what sounded like hundreds of birds started screaming. We legged it to the car, ended up starting it with all our stuff still on our laps. We hadn't bothered to even put in the back seat. As we reversed out the driveway, we saw somebody running up the side of the house towards us. We sped the entire way home, and didn't sleep at all that night. When I was 10 and my youngest brother Ben was only 1, there was this one weekend that my parents were painting our bedrooms, so we would have to sleep in the basement. There was a pull-out couch down there that turned into a bed, and Ben had an extra crib down there. I was only 10, so sleeping in a pitch-dark basement was very uncomfortable. Somehow, having Ben down there made me feel a bit safer though. He would wake me up in the middle of the night crying, and for some reason, tending to him made sleeping down there a little less scary. But it was this one time that I woke up to him screaming. Not crying, screaming, like no 1-year-old should. I was scared shitless immediately and ran over to him to see what was wrong. He was standing up looking at me, pointing to something. I looked in the direction he was pointing at. He was pointing into the pitch-dark boiler room right next to his crib. I felt like 1,000 knives just stabbed me in the chest, and even through the heat of the moment, I vaguely remember the faint sound of something falling over in the boiler room, and I felt as if I was being watched in that basement. I grabbed Ben and got the hell out of there as quickly as possible. I have never gone back down in that basement. But she groggily told me that she had.
Simon and Joe both invest in stocks. Simon uses eToro to invest in stocks without paying.
I remember this just vaguely, since I was little at the time, maybe 7. In my old house, my room had its own floor. It wasn't even supposed to be a bedroom. It was more of an attachment to the attic, or a closet-type room. The people that owned the house before us used it as a playroom for their daughters. My room also had a huge closet door that was attached to the attic. The closet was elevated up so that you would have to climb a set of wooden stairs to get into it. It had a big sliding door, and it was completely packed with toys and other junk from my childhood. Since I was little at the time, I always got scared of being so separated from the rest of my family and having that huge closet in my room. Then there was this one night. I was laying in bed, afraid after watching a scary movie with my family. Then I heard the sound of a toy fall over up in the closet. I jumped out of my bed and ran to my parents' room. They told me there was no one in my closet. They saw how afraid I was, so they let me sleep in their room that night. The next night, I had kind of forgotten about it until I heard it again. The sound of a container of Legos spilling out everywhere up in the closet. Again, I ran to my parents' room and told them about it. My dad was starting to grow impatient with me. He reluctantly agreed to let me sleep in their room again. The next day, me and my mom checked the closet, and there it was. A pile of Legos lay on the floor, spilled out of the container. I thought this was proof that somebody was in my closet, but my mom assured me that it simply fell over. That night, my dad locked his door. He said he was tired of my nonsense. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay there completely silent with my young boy imagination running, waiting for another sound to come from the closet. It was probably about an hour before it happened. It broke the silence. The sound of the closet door rolling open with force. The moonlight shining through my window illuminated the figure standing by my closet door. I let out the most horrific, ear-piercing scream you've ever heard, as pure terror swept over my body, a feeling that I still remember today. The figure jumped down from the closet and ran out of my room and out the front door of my house. My mom ran up to my room in shock, as my dad ran downstairs trying to catch whoever it was, but he never did. The police never caught the man. When I was in 8th grade, I went on a school trip that was called the Louisiana Tour. It was mostly going around to significant sites in South Louisiana. One of the places we went to was Myrtle's Plantation, which is considered to be one of the most haunted places in the country. There are all kinds of stories about the place, but at one point we were standing in a room as a part of a larger group, and the tour guide was talking about something. I don't remember what. As I'm standing there, I start to hear what sounds like someone hitting a piano key. After I heard it a couple times, I started to look around for the source of the sound. I didn't see a piano, but I kept hearing it, so I asked my friends who were standing near me if they heard it. They said no. When I heard it again, I said there it is again, they must have heard it. They thought I was crazy. So I went back to looking around the room. Everyone's eyes were on the tour guide except for one woman. She caught my eye and pointed at me, and then at her ear with a questioning look. I realized she was asking if I heard it too, and I nodded. At this point, the tour guide starts telling a story about a soldier who had died there and that he played the piano, and multiple guests had reported hearing him playing in the night. I honestly didn't know what to think. I guess I still don't. I talked to the woman as we were all leaving the room, and she said she heard the exact same thing as me, but her husband and son had not heard it. It was near Halloween time when my friends and I were telling ghost stories. My friend said she was going to tell a story about her parents' first date. She said she didn't like telling the story since it was actually true, but we prodded her on. To cut to the chase, the parents had a nice, if awkward, first date, and around the time that they would have said goodnight, the male in the situation, who's my friend's dad, suggested that they go for a midnight hike up Provo Canyon. He apparently knew the place, since he had done a fair amount of rock climbing in the area. So the two drove up the mouth of the canyon, got out of their cars, and started hiking under just the light of the stars, since it was a new moon. At some point, the man starts getting a bad feeling, since the pathway ahead, which would pass under some trees, would be dark, and because it was getting quite late. He ignores the feeling and presses on. A minute later, the feeling came back to the man. He ignored it again and started walking a bit of the way into the trees when his foot hit something soft in the middle of the path. Under the trees, it was too dark to see just what this soft thing was, and the feeling came back stronger than ever. Instead of finding out what his foot had bumped into, he and the woman both agreed to hightail it out of there. Years later, after being married for some time, they were watching an interview with the serial killer Ted Bundy. In response to a question asking him to describe the time that he felt the closest to being caught, he explained about the night that he lured a girl into Provo Canyon and had just killed her when he heard some people coming up the trail. He explained how he hid in the trees just in time, only to watch some guy walk right into the body, and for some reason, just turn around and walk away. My school's library is open until 2 in the morning for the idiots like me that don't do their essays until the last minute. It's a pretty small building and most of the books are in the basement area called the stacks. Just to give you a quick layout, there's the big main stairs that go down to the stacks, a vending machine room, and the long hallway with the 4 entrances into the stacks. The stacks are 2 really big rooms on opposite sides of the hallway with a huge amount of bookshelves and study desks lining the walls. I was there around 11 p.m. last year. It was a pretty research-intensive essay, so I was down in the stacks working in one of the study desks, so I didn't have to keep going upstairs and downstairs again. I had been there for maybe 2 hours, and everyone except for a boy working a few desks down from me had already left. I was pretty zoned out by this point. It was an 8 a.m. class, so I didn't have much time until it was due, and I was sort of panicking. So it really pissed me off when I heard someone flipping through book pages really fast to make them do that loud whipping noise at the other end of the room. I sort of ignored it for a while, thinking they'd go away eventually, but they just kept doing it. After about 5 minutes, I got sick of it and started to walk over to tell them to knock it off. I get about 3 steps across the room and it just stops. I sat back down and it was quiet again, only for like 10 minutes before the flipping pages noise started again, only loads louder, like they'd grabbed a huge book that time. The boy started to get pissed off too, and he stood up and started walking around through the bookshelves trying to find them. It kept going, so I got up too and started looking around with him. It got really loud and it was pretty obvious where it was coming from by that point, so we started walking towards it. He was on one side of the shelves and I was on the other. We walked all the way down the shelves. No one there. We hadn't seen anyone come in the stacks and we were on the side of the room with the entrances. No way could anyone have come in without us seeing them. The noise stopped again and we both sort of just slowly walked back to our seats. I assumed it was just a fan or something in the other room and I really needed to get my essay done. We sat down and immediately the noises started again. It sounded like it was coming from right next to the guy's chair. He shoved his stuff in his bag, looked at me, said, "Fuck this," and took off. I was out of there maybe 5 seconds behind him. I still won't go back in the stacks at night, even when there's other people down there. This happened when I still had my fishing boat. It was a horrifying experience that will never leave us. Me and my wife departed from the East Coast for our 2-day fishing trip in the North Atlantic. The first day and night were normal. We got a decent catch. At night we played cards while listening to music. It was enjoyable up until the next night. After a slow day at
Simon and Joe both invest in stocks. Simon uses eToro to invest.
After a slow day at sea, we were playing cards again inside. This night without the music. It was at that moment that we heard the sound of a boat motor. We rushed outside to see a man piloting a crappy old motorboat with absolutely no lights on. He had stopped directly in front of our bow. The man was middle-aged. He had a beard and a baseball cap on. I went up closer and asked him if he needed help. He asked us if we had any spare gasoline. I apologized and told him we didn't. I asked the man if he was low on fuel and if he needed a ride back to the shore, but he declined. He claimed he had plenty of gas, which brought an awkward silence as me and my wife wondered why he asked us for gas then. The silence started to creep me and my wife out, mostly because of the way he just blankly stared at me. The only reason I could see was because of the deck light in the front of our boat. Other than that, we were surrounded by darkness. The man finally broke the silence and asked us if we had a good catch that day. I told him we didn't, still trying to be polite, even though the situation was odd and creepy. I asked the man how he was getting around in the darkness, but all he gave me was a chuckle, as if I had made a joke. I figured he misheard me. He turned his little motorboat around, and the last thing he said to us was, "Nice meeting you folks." He sailed off into the total blackness surrounding us. Me and my wife were completely weirded out. My wife told me she was afraid he was going to rob us. Being a fisher, you run into and make conversation with other sailors and fishers all the time, but I knew something about that guy was off. The fact that he came up to us so late at night, so far from the shore, and alone in that little motorboat, and the way he acted, we were both really uncomfortable, so I decided to turn out our lights and sail a bit north just to make sure the guy couldn't find us again. Call me paranoid. Later that night, probably around 2 a.m, I woke up to the disturbing and ear-piercing scream of my wife. I shot up from my laying position to see a man standing at the edge of our bed. I lunged out of the bed towards the man, but he was out of the cabin before I could even get out of the room. I heard the sound of the same motorboat starting before speeding away into the darkness again. We sailed all the way back to the shore that night and reported the man right away. Of course, nothing was ever heard of the topic again. We still have no idea what the man wanted or what he was planning on doing, but it still gives me nightmares to this day. The way my bedroom was laid out was that across the room from my bed, there's a small alcove that does not receive any light because of the closet that's slightly in front of it. So the closet blocks the ceiling light and the ambient light from outside when it's dark. I was in 4th year high school and was trying to sleep but couldn't. You know that feeling like someone's staring at you? I was feeling it. I couldn't shake it, and it just felt like whatever was staring at me had such malicious intent in it. I opened my eyes and my gaze was drawn to that dark corner of the room where I saw a hazy, darker outline in it. I got goosebumps, but thought that it was nothing there. I'm just imagining things. I closed my eyes again, trying to force myself to get sleep, but I can't shake that evil feeling stare. Then there was a creak sound, the sound from somebody putting pressure on the floor. I opened my eyes again, and that shadow thing was in the opposite corner now. All my inner senses went ballistic, and I threw my pillow and blanket over my head as I cried myself to sleep, all while hoping that the thing wouldn't come closer. I know I didn't imagine or dream it, and it still sends chills down my spine to this day. It was the first time my family ever went camping together. I was 18 at the time. We probably wouldn't have gone if it weren't for my brother and sister who were still only 11 and happened to be twins. It was mid-July and I was actually excited to do it. We drove all the way out to the country. We didn't go to a camping site. My dad just parked the car on the side of a quiet road, and we hiked about a mile into the woods until we found a small clearing in the woods. We pitched our 2 tents, one for me and my siblings and one for my parents. So come nighttime, I couldn't sleep at all. Trying to fall asleep in that sleeping bag was like trying to fall asleep on the grass. I just couldn't get to sleep. I spun around and tried to make myself comfortable for hours. My little brother and sister had been asleep for a long time at that point. And then I heard the sound of the zipper to the tent zipping down. I looked up and saw someone poking their head into the tent. I couldn't see who it was. "Dad?" I whispered. Whoever it was removed their head from the inside of the tent. "Dad?" I said louder. Whoever it was quickly moved away from the tent, leaving it unzipped. I was so confused. I was sure it was my mom or dad just checking on me, so I crawled out of the tent and walked over to my parents' tent. I unzipped it and crawled inside. My parents were both in their sleeping bags. I shook my dad until he woke up. I asked him if he had just checked on us. He said no. I got chills as he said it. I then woke up my mom, hoping that it was her, but she groggily told me that she hadn't left the tent either. I got goosebumps all over as I came to the realization that somebody actually came up to our tent, opened up the zipper, and peered inside. A stranger. For all I know, some sort of psycho. I couldn't even really tell if my parents took me seriously or not, or maybe I just don't remember. But I do remember that I didn't get a minute of sleep that night. My parents were on their honeymoon to Key West. When they arrived at the hotel to check in, they were told that the room would be non-smoking. With my dad being a smoker, they requested a different room. They got the room switch and went to their room. As they got off the elevator, the smell of fresh paint was overwhelming. Down the hall there was a painter with all necessary supplies laid out around him as he was painting the wall. As my parents walked past him, they casually greeted him, and the painter had absolutely no acknowledgement of their presence. Whatever. When they got to their room, the smell of paint was even worse in there. So bad it wasn't even bearable, so they decided to go to the front desk to change rooms. When they explained the situation, the attendant looked very confused and informed them that there wasn't a scheduled paint job on that floor for that day, but agreed to change their room anyway. My parents go back to their floor to grab their luggage, and the painter is completely gone. All supplies cleaned up and gone within 10 minutes, and the smell of paint was completely gone. At this point, my parents were freaked out, but didn't think much of it and went to their new room. The next morning on their way to breakfast, they overhear a tour guide talking to a group. My parents tuned in when the guide mentioned the floor that they were originally supposed to stay on. Apparently a long time ago, there was a painter on that floor painting and fell down the elevator shaft to his death. Now my parents don't normally believe in the paranormal, but after an event like this that they had no explanation for, it freaked them out a good bit. This story didn't happen to me, it happened to my cousin, and yet it still freaks me out thinking about it. This story is all too true. My cousin Nikki was on Skype with his girlfriend Sam at around 1 in the morning on a Friday night. She was asking him to come over and stay the night, but he didn't really want to drive over that late. Sometime into the conversation, Nikki noticed the closet door behind Sam open a crack. Nikki pointed it out, and Sammy turned and looked at the closet. They both ended up ignoring it. It was probably another half hour into the conversation that the closet door creaked open even more. Nikki spotted it again and told Sam that her little brother must be hiding in the closet. She denied it and told him the window was open or something, so there must have been a draft. It was about half an hour later that the closet door completely opened and somebody stepped out of the closet and walked out of Sam's bedroom. Sam didn't seem to notice, but Nikki got startled from what he just saw. He told her that her little brother was hiding in her closet, but what she said next scared Nikki shitless. She told him that she was home alone that night. Nikki started yelling at the screen for her to lock her door and call the police, and that he would be over there as fast as he could. Sam just started to understand the situation as she turned and saw the closet door completely open. She ran over to her doorway and let out a blood-curdling scream before slamming the door shut and locking it. Nikki drove over as fast as he could while calling the police. When he got there, the front door was left open, so he ran into the house into Sam's room. He knocked on the door and told her it was him, but she wouldn't answer. When the police finally arrived, they busted open the door to find her curled up in the corner of the room in shock. She later told the police that she had seen somebody standing face to face with her at the doorway before shutting the door. It was a dark and stormy night, the kind of stormy that I loved, thunder and lightning roaring, so I was staying up late watching movies. I lived with my dad, but he wasn't home that night. He was working nights. Anyway, after I finished watching the movie Forrest Gump for the 100th time, I decided 2 a.m. was a good time to get some shut-eye. I loved going to sleep during thunderstorms. It was just enjoyable to listen to, but suddenly, I heard the sound of something hitting my window. It wasn't the sound of rain hitting the window, but in such a big storm I didn't think much of it and put my head back down. But a few seconds later, the same noise. Something hits the window again. This time I made the sound out to be a rock hitting the window. My heart started racing. It couldn't be my dad. He would call if something was wrong. Another rock hits the window. I found myself glued to my bed. I didn't want to look out the window, but whoever was outside surely knew I was up there. I had just turned the TV off. They could have seen the bright glare through the window. I just decided if I ignored it, they would go away. Another rock hit the window, and then another. It was getting faster. The rain started to lighten up, and that's when I heard the sound of a truck engine running down in the street. A much louder thump to the window was where I drew the line. I got out of my bed planning to call the cops. I ran down the stairs towards the phone, but as I passed the front door, I saw something. Something through the glass window at the top of the door. It was the face of a person looking through to me. It seemed like they had a smile on their face. I sprinted to the kitchen and called the police. They said there was an officer nearby, and they should be there shortly. Whoever was at the door started fiddling with the doorknob and eventually ramming into it, trying to bust it open. I grabbed a knife for protection and yelled that the police were coming, before running back upstairs to my room. After about a minute, the ramming to the door stopped and there were no more rocks hitting my window. I still didn't dare to look out the window, but I remember hearing the sound of the truck drive off. A few minutes later, I heard the sound of a police siren outside, and moments later, the doorbell rang. I explained everything to the officer. I described the face as best as I could. Unfortunately, I couldn't provide him any information about the vehicle. If only I had looked out the window. I still regret not taking a quick look. There was never enough info for the police to catch these people. Not sure if they had intention of robbing my house, or much worse.
Simon and Joe both invest in stocks. Simon uses eToro to invest in stocks without paying.
I'm currently a freshman in college. I came home this past week for a funeral, but let's backtrack a little. My senior year in high school, I was in the library during study hall doing some computer science work on the computer since my laptop at home didn't have JCreator on it. Anyways, this boy who was in my class sat next to me since those two computers were the only ones with JCreator. He was a really tall, very pale boy. He had long black hair that covered one of his eyes. He wore an anti-flag tee, ripped jean jacket, and Doc Martens. He never spoke to anyone in class, and I'd never seen him with anyone else. So I took a seat, and he looked up at me like I committed murder. I quickly looked away and started rummaging through my bag as a distraction. As my head was down, I heard him chuckle and then mumble, "Of course." I froze with my head still down towards my bag. I just dismissed it as him talking to his computer, as code can be quite frustrating. I sat back up and quickly typed in my login details. To break the awkwardness, I said, "She assigns too much homework, I can barely keep up." His eyes stayed locked on the computer screen. "You want the answers, don't you?" I laughed and said, "No thanks, I won't learn anything that way." Usually I would have said yes, but I didn't want to see his evil stare again. It was like he was staring into my soul. He laughed again, in that creepy laugh. So creepy that I had to close my eyes and cringe. I opened them and looked over to see him gone. The strange thing was he left his flash drive. I waited about 10 minutes to see if he would come back, but he didn't. Study hall ended at 1 and it was 12:50. I decided I would take it and give it back to him tomorrow in computer science class. I threw it in a little box above my bed. Gotta admit, it was an awesome flash drive. It was a Swiss Army knife with a flash drive in the middle. Here's the crazy part. After that, he never came to school again. He was notorious for being absent, so for the first month no one batted an eye. However, May rolled around and we were all getting ready to graduate. I had completely forgotten about the flash drive, until 2 days ago when I came home. I needed one, and I remembered I still had that boy's. I scanned it with my Norton, and it said it was all safe. I was planning to delete all this stuff so I could put my PowerPoint for business class on it. Naturally, however, I started snooping through his files. The first thing I saw was a folder named Computer Science. I opened it, and all the answers to every assignment was there. I thought, damn, maybe that's why he left it, so I could copy off of him. Maybe because he knew he was never coming back. I went back, and the second folder was music. I kinda had to open that one to see what he listened to. Surprisingly, not what I expected. There were only 3 songs. Running on Empty by Jackson Browne, White Rabbit by Jefferson Airplane, and Helter Skelter by the Beatles. I went back again. There was an untitled folder. Inside it was AP Literature. There were a bunch of essays and various junk. There was one called The Best.Doc. I opened it, and it was merely a 10-page document of notebook pages filled entirely with his first and last name, handwritten. I went back again. This is where it gets weird. He had taken pictures of the emergency escape plan posters on the door in every classroom. There was a picture of a lit cigarette on the bathroom floor, and another picture of some coins on the bathroom floor with a yellow post-it note next to it saying, "Chump change" in all caps. Now this is the weird part. There was a picture of me, taken while I was reading a book in class. From the looks of it, it was my English class that he was not in. There was also a document titled, "Rest in Peace to ... but it was empty when I opened it. I still have no idea if this was a joke or not. For all I know, he never showed up again because he realized that he lost his hard drive. This story happened a few years back to me and a friend who I'll call Allie. We're now both 15, making us 12 when this story occurred. Okay, so me and Allie have been friends since 2nd grade, and we would usually spend all weekends and free time together. We always have been into paranormal and ghost stuff. We had every reason to believe that every house we ever went into was haunted. We would go on ghost hunts like the TV shows with a flip phone to record the sounds. But there will always be one night that stands out to me that still haunts me to this day. It was around midnight, and we were hyper and awake like most kids of our age on the weekends. So we decided to do another ghost hunt in my house. We got the flip phone ready, and we borrowed my dad's touchscreen to actually videotape. This was the first and last time we used that. My basement was not like most, because the house I was living in at the time was very old and therefore very old-fashioned. So down the stairs, there's one main big room that we use for storage, and a little further there was another medium-sized room for the washer and the dryer, and the farthest was a small little cell-type room that we never used, mainly because everyone was too creeped out to go in it. Me and Allie walked down the stairs, turned on the camera and flip phone recorder, and we started asking the usual questions you would see on TV, like, is there anybody here? Give me a sign if you're here, and that type of thing. We finally got tired of it and went back upstairs and into my room to be so excited as we reviewed our first video recording. This was a big step for us because we wanted to be ghost hunters so bad. We were watching and we kinda got disappointed as we didn't find anything in the video or voice recording. Usually we would make something up, like a footstep that wasn't ours, to make us feel less bad, but this time we were so excited about the video we didn't even want to make anything up. We couldn't sleep, so we played a few board games, and then we both agreed to review it again, because maybe we missed something. And oh boy, we did. While reviewing the tape again, we both could just feel this bad energy coming from it. I guess we didn't realize it before because we were too filled with excitement. We went on anyway, and as we paid more attention, we could actually hear footsteps that weren't ours. Then what showed up on the tape, I still see when I close my eyes. It was the most horrifying thing I've ever seen. The camera was on Allie, and behind her was this figure that looked like a distorted, almost human thing with bright white eyes that almost seemed as if they were watching you through the video. At that point we shut it off, and we were both in complete shock. We couldn't tell my father as he was asleep, being so early in the morning. We both decided to just not tell anybody and keep it our secret. Even though we never went into that basement again, we both still talk and sometimes even dream about it. To this day, I don't know if it was our imagination or if there was something with us in that basement, but I'll never go in there again. So this all happened during Halloween in 2014. My name is Max, and I'm from a small town in Findlay, Ohio. I used to go to a high school at County School about 10 minutes from where I lived called Van Buren High School. Van Buren was a nice little village with good people for the most part, but the only problem was that there were some evil creeps that could be found there if you knew where to look. The biggest hotspot for them to be found was the Van Buren State Park. Everyone knew that the state park had a little infamy to it, as it was known for some rapes and the like. Now, I've been to the park many times with friends and classmates, and nothing bad ever happened to us, so I never thought much of it. I have a lot of good memories of the place actually, like the many times when my friends and I would bike the trails and set off the works bombs in the woods or go fishing in the lake. However, fast forward to my senior year at Van Buren on the day of Halloween. My friend Ian and I saw the darker side of Van Buren State Park. The summer before my senior year, I enlisted in the Army National Guard, so it was important that I worked out and stayed in shape. So that day, I asked my best friend Ian if he wanted to go run the trails in the park with me after school, and he said he would, as he likes to work out when he can as well. It was probably about 4 o'clock in the afternoon when I pulled into one of the parking lots, waiting for Ian to meet me there, when I saw this old silver car with a bald and just disturbing man suspiciously sitting in the lot. Knowing that creeps hang out at the parks, I glanced over to check out what he was doing when I noticed he was staring at me and would not take his eyes off of me. It was a very unsettling stare, one that made him look hungry and me uncomfortable. His eyes were wide open, and I'm pretty sure he had a frown, or maybe a grin. We made eye contact, and he nodded at me as if he were trying to say hello, but would not drop his glare. I nodded back but broke eye contact since I was pretty uncomfortable. However, I noticed out of the corner of my eye that he was still staring. At this point, I had enough, and I sped out of there and pulled out of the parking lot. But when I looked in my rearview mirror, I saw he was following me. This made me floor my gas pedal, and I sped to my high school parking lot where I lost him. I called Ian and told him that I was at the high school, and that he might have to deal with this creep alone. And then my stomach sank. I got a text from Ian saying here. So I made my way back there, and sure enough, right when I pulled in, I saw Ian's car, and 2 spaces away was the scary bald guy in the silver car, still staring. I nodded to Ian for him to follow me in his car to a different parking lot at the park, and we made our way over there. We were safe, or so we thought, and got out of our cars to walk down the hill to check out the trails before we ran them. I don't really like to run with items in my pockets, so we began to walk back up the hill when we saw that old silver car circling in the lot looking for us. At the angle we were at on the hill, he must not have been able to find us, although we could see him. We waited a few minutes before walking up the hill because we figured the 2 of us, who were athletes, could take on this one guy. As we reached the top of the hill, he was gone. Feeling pretty safe, Ian and I decided to still run the trails, but I made sure to grab a rock to use as a weapon for my own peace of mind in case we would run into the possible rapist or killer in the woods. I'll never know the man's intentions, but given that place's notoriety and his disturbing look, it couldn't have been good. Nowadays, I've graduated Van Buren, and I'm an infantryman in the National Guard while attending Bowling Green State University. Sometimes when I go back home to visit, I like to go for drives at night, and sometimes I like to check the state park just to see what monsters lurk there. I'm always armed with a knife, and I'm in good shape, but it still makes me uneasy. I'm sure one of these days I might encounter something like that again. But I'm not stupid or crazy, because as soon as I do, I'm hightailing it out of there once again. So as for anyone else, make sure that if you go camping or hiking at state parks, that you are somehow armed, no self-defense, and never go alone. In my room next to my bed is a big storage closet. It doesn't have a regular door like you would expect. It's a kind of big square door without a knob that just comes off when you grab it by the edges. So rewind to several years ago when I was 19. I remember the first time it happened. I went to sleep and woke up in the morning to find that the door had been opened and was leaning on the wooden edge of my bed. Now this wasn't the strangest thing ever, as it had happened in the past. After all, there were no hinges or anything holding the door in. I pushed the door back into the wall and got ready for school. The next night, I woke up around 4 in the morning. I could have sworn I had woken up to a noise. I sat up and looked around my room in the dark, and noticed the door was leaning on the edge of my bed again. Now I was concerned that the edges to the hole in the wall were starting to chip away, and the door could no longer fit as tightly as it used to. I left it that way overnight and fixed it in the morning. The following night, I was having trouble sleeping. It had to be at least 2 hours of my rolling around bed trying to fall asleep. That's when I heard a huge thump, and I knew what it was. I could even see it in the dark. The door fell open again. I was so done with this. I mentally decided to just leave it open from now on. That's when I heard the slightest movement of a plastic bag from inside of the closet. My heart literally skipped a beat when I heard this. There was no draft in the room at all. I hesitantly flicked on the light switch and looked into the open closet. My biggest fear came true when I saw someone inside the closet peering at me in my bed. Within maybe half a second of my turning on the lights, he tried to hide as if I didn't see him. I couldn't even move. All I could do was scream the word "Dad." I screamed so loud it took my dad maybe 10 seconds to make it to my room. I pointed at the closet and he looked inside. Only then did I finally feel safe to get up and stand behind him. My dad crawled all the way in there, and he couldn't find anyone though. He came out and assured me I was just seeing things, and I started to question that myself. Still, I couldn't sleep in that room. I slept on the floor in my parents' room with a blanket. Well, I wouldn't say slept, as before that could even happen, I heard my bedroom door open from down the hall outside, and then someone literally ran down the stairs and out the front door, slamming it behind them. My parents heard it, and it was only then they believed me. We tried to chase whoever it was down, but he was gone. We later found out he was hiding in an empty container inside the closet.
When I was 22, I got a job in New York City. Living in Jersey, however, there was no way I'd be able to do that commute daily, so moving was a necessity. Only thing, I didn't have a lot of money yet, so when I saw an ad on Craigslist for an available bedroom in an apartment in the Hell's Kitchen area for a really low price, I jumped on it. I took a ride to the city the next day to view the apartment, and the landlord gave me a quick tour of the place. The landlord himself seemed a bit socially awkward, but that didn't really matter at all. The place did come with a catch: I'd have a roommate. The landlord said he's a very quiet, to himself kind of person, which he said was good. My roommate's name would be Bren. The landlord knocked on Bren's door asking if he'd like to come out and say hello. Bren didn't even answer. The landlord suggested he might be taking a nap. So we moved on to talking in the living room, where I said I was interested in renting. I signed an application, and the next day, the landlord called and offered me the room. So I moved in the next week. My dad helped me unload all my furniture into my little room. Something odd to note was that never once did this Bren character come out during all this commotion to at least say hi. He was definitely home. We heard him moving around in his room. I came to the early realization that he probably wasn't going to be friendly at all. When we finished unloading the van, my dad left and I was alone, officially moved out. I sat in my bed and started watching Netflix on my laptop. Then I heard the door to Bren's room open and close. This seemed like my chance to go out and say hi. It was his first time leaving his room. I got out of my bed, but before I could even get to my bedroom door, the front door to the apartment slammed shut. I stepped outside to the living room, and no one was there. I didn't know what the deal with this Bren guy was, but surely he had to know we'd have to meet eventually. I went back to my room, ate a bowl of ramen, and went to sleep. I woke up when I heard the front door to the apartment close again. Then footsteps followed. The footsteps on the creaky wood floor made their way to the outside of my door, then stopped. I sat up and looked at the crack below the door. The outlines of feet could be seen through the light creeping in under the door. Why was he just standing out there like a creep? Of course, I didn't say anything. I just waited for him to walk away. I didn't have my door locked, and I was low-key terrified of him entering my room. But thankfully, he walked away from my door and back to his room, and I heard him shut his door. I tried to go to sleep, but all night, all I heard were thumps coming from his room. I had no idea what he could possibly be doing. I was tempted to go knock on his door and tell him to keep it down, but I hadn't even met the guy yet, so I had to deal with it. Eventually, I fell asleep, and when I woke up in the morning, it seemed Bren was out already, maybe at work. I didn't know at the time. I spent most of that day shopping for groceries and basic apartment necessities. When I got back, I dropped all the bags on the couch in the living room to give myself a rest. I cooked dinner, watched some Netflix on the couch. All the while, Bren never came home. I did a quick run to the nearby 7-Eleven to get toothpaste, and when I got back, I noticed Bren's door was cracked open and the light was on. So I figured this was it, the moment for me to say hello. I went to his door, knocked lightly twice, then pushed the door open. What I found in there was shocking, or maybe I should say what I didn't find in there. The room was completely empty. Not a single piece of furniture, except for a single chair sitting in the corner of the room, a kind of chair you'd find in a high school classroom. My heart suddenly started racing and I started to shake. I turned off the light in that room and shut the door. Could this Bren person have been in the process of moving out? I went to my room, locked the door, and sat on my bed, suddenly getting a really bad headache. I took out my phone and decided to call the landlord to ask him what the hell was going on. After dialing his number, I put the phone to my ear and suddenly heard a loud ringing sound coming from my closet. I felt like my heart, which was already racing, was now in my stomach. The phone rang twice, then went to voicemail. I got out from the bed, ready to open the closet, but I stopped and realized that given that the phone rang twice, that means he had his phone and he declined the call. I had the sick realization that the landlord was likely in my closet and there never even was a Bren. I ran to the bathroom, locked myself in, and called the cops. They got to the apartment shortly and searched the whole apartment with me. Sure enough, we found the landlord hiding under my bed. I tried pressing charges for trespassing, trying to get myself out of the lease, but it turned out there never even was a lease. The dude wasn't even an actual landlord. He didn't even own the apartment. I didn't get the rest of the story, like how he got the keys in the first place. I had my dad come the next day to help me move all my stuff back home. I found another apartment the next week, and it was a huge hassle going through the whole moving process again. I knew from the start the so-called landlord gave off bad vibes, but who would have ever imagined the events that were about to take place? There was an ad on Zillow for a shared apartment near the chicken farm I worked at. I moved in because it was convenient and already furnished. I just dropped off my clothes and a mini dresser, and I already had a bed to sleep in the spare room. The man who was renting the room out to me was old. He was like 70 or something, and his name was Ben. It was a non-contractual agreement, meaning I'd pay him by the week, but he was more or less still a roommate. He was very old-fashioned, and that included everything in the house. I've never exactly come from a wealthy family, so trust me when I say this was a steal for me. One night after getting home from a long day of work, I collapsed into bed and fell asleep like a baby. But suddenly, I awoke to the bedroom door opening. Light poured into the room from the hallway, and standing in the doorway was the old man, Ben, with his hand on the doorknob. He said in his deep, hoarse voice, "Stay out of the basement." He said he knew I went down there. I defended myself and assured him I didn't, because I actually didn't. He shut the door, and I heard him walk downstairs. I sat there thinking this guy must be unstable or something. The next day, I was off from work. Ben took his old jalopy down the road. I'm guessing to the store. While I was alone, I stared at the basement door. I knew it was the basement door because I'd seen him go down there before. I went to open it just to peek downstairs, but obviously it was pitch black down there. I would have never been compelled to go down there if it weren't for his bizarre remark about not going down there. But I figured he wasn't going to be home anytime soon, so I continued down. I found the light switch at the bottom step for some reason. It was for the most part a normal basement so far, but there was a door in the corner. Behind that door was something unimaginable. The door was very hard to open because there was some rubber concealer under the door. I'm guessing to keep that awful smell out of the rest of the basement and house. The inside of this little room was a nightmare. Bloodstains on the concrete floor, black bags stacked in the corner of the room, stretched long enough to be carrying bodies or body parts. And the smell of rotting life. I had to refrain from puking right there. I noticed a camera hung in the top right corner of the room, aimed down at some workbench. I took a quick picture of the room and hurried out of there. I went up to the spare bedroom, packed all of my clothes in a garbage bag, and heard the front door slam shut downstairs. He was back. I played it cool and greeted him from the upstairs hallway. He didn't respond. I heard him open the basement door and stomp downstairs. I saw that as my cue to sprint to my car. I made it to my car and without looking back, drove away from there. I drove 15 miles back to my brother's farm and showed him the picture. He said I was an idiot for not calling the sheriff sooner. So I called 911 and told them to bring a search warrant to Ben's address and check the basement before he could clear it out. I made it clear I was simply his temporary roommate or tenant living with him and came across it. A few hours later, someone from the sheriff's department came to my brother's farm asking for my ID and some other information. I complied with them. They gave me the relieving news that Ben had been arrested. He was in the process of clearing any evidence from his basement, but he wasn't quick enough. The deputies didn't go into much detail about what exactly they found in those bags or anything else, but I don't think they were allowed to. They thanked me and went on their way. My brother let me stay with him for a few weeks till I was ready to get back out there and find another apartment. I'm not sure how many of you went to college, but for those of you who did, you most likely remember that feeling of walking into your dorm for the first time, meeting your roommate, the person you're supposed to ideally be friends with for the next 4 years. I certainly remember mine. I walked into my dorm for the first time, and there was my roommate. He had fair skin, black hair, glasses, and a slightly feminine tone in his voice. There was nothing wrong with any of that, but to me, he just immediately struck me as the gaming type, which was not exactly someone who I was going to vibe with easily. From the moment I shook his hand and he gave me a dead fish handshake, I was a little put off. I'll call him John for the purpose of this story. I left the room to go say hi to the other kids on the floor and meet as many people as possible. I instantly vibed with some of the other kids more than I did with John. Anyway, that first night consisted of a lot of unpacking and hanging around in the room. So I did try to get to know John a little bit. It wasn't that he was a mean person, it was just he didn't seem to really know how to converse. I would ask him questions about himself, and he'd give me one-word responses, or responses that barely even made sense. He even went to bed really early, shutting off his lamp at like 10 o'clock. No one had classes the next day, so I just found it odd. I put headphones in and watched videos on my phone until around 12. Then I went to sleep. The next morning, a few of the guys on my floor and I went to the dining hall together. When I got back to my room, I noticed my duffel bag was moved. I looked at John, who was sitting on his bed. Then I went to go through my bag to see if anything was missing. I couldn't find what it was, but my bag just seemed lighter. I straight up accused John of going through my bag, and he denied it with a very aggressive tone. What could I do, though? I didn't have cameras in the room, so I couldn't prove it. The next night, I tried inviting John out with me and a couple of the other kids from the floor. He didn't want to go, claiming he was trying to stay on top of his work as soon as possible. So I went out, and when I got back, John was fast asleep. It was kind of late, so I just went straight to bed too. It started to rain pretty heavy outside. A storm was in the forecast. I woke up in the middle of the night hearing thunder crashing. I was too comfortable and lazy to roll over and look outside, but even with my eyes closed, I was noticing the constant flashing from the lightning. If anything, it actually helped put me back to sleep. The next morning, I woke up, and my backpack was open and moved. I didn't accuse John this time. I decided I was going to stay up that night and wait, listen to what he was doing. So after a long rainy day, night came, as did the time for me to hit the hay. I stayed on my phone for a long time, listening to the rain outside the window. Around 1 or 2 a.m., I flipped on my side and pretended to be asleep. I did this for a long time, and eventually I started noticing the flashes again. 2 or 3, actually. I turned to my other side and saw John sitting upright in his bed. I only caught a glimpse of him quickly putting down his arms as I flipped over. Suddenly all those flashes made sense. It wasn't lightning, it was him taking pictures of me. I played dumb and said, "What are you doing?" He stuttered and said he couldn't sleep. The next day I told the other kids on the floor about it and how weird John was overall. They said I should request a room change. I agreed with them. At whatever point I went back to the room, John was actually gone for once. I couldn't believe it. His laptop was also on his bed with the lid cracked open. I had to snoop. I was too curious. I opened the laptop, and I was on John's desktop, which was littered full of folders, programs, and images. It was the messiest desktop I've ever seen. I started opening the random pictures on his desktop. Most of them were weird, but then I got to the disturbing ones. Pictures of me. Upon opening one of them, I realized it was a picture of me in bed, taken with an iPhone with the flash. He had stored all the pictures he'd taken of me on his computer. He even had pictures of my duffel bag and the inside of my backpack. I took a video of the laptop screen, then deleted every picture I could find from his computer and closed his laptop. I went straight to the hall that dealt with dorm life and showed them the video. I requested a new roommate immediately. I don't know how John was disciplined by the school, but I was going to be given a new room across campus the next day. However, on my last night with John, I couldn't sleep at all. I heard the springs under his mattress kinking as he got up from his bed at some odd hour in the night. Then silence. Silence until I heard a short, quiet exhale come from right above my bed. He was standing over my bed, I just knew it. But I was just simply too afraid to turn around. Less than a minute later, I heard the springs under his mattress again, and the rest of the night was silence. I was out first thing in the morning. My new roommate was like a breath of fresh air, a normal guy. It's a little creepy knowing that John Kid still has all those pictures of me sleeping on his phone. I don't know what his goal with those pictures were. I don't know why he just stood over my bed like that the last night I was there. I don't know why he went through my bags. The kid was an insane creep, and I'm happy I got away from him. When I moved out from home, my dad's friend Kathy was subletting her apartment with 2 bedrooms. She said she'd give me a good deal, however I'd have to share it with some older woman she found. She was tight on money, so I understood. Kathy introduced the woman and I the day I moved in. Her name was Betty. She was like 60 years old. It felt weird knowing I'd have a roommate who could almost be my grandma. Since Kathy was subletting the apartment, it already had furniture. I just had to bring my own bed and dresser. The weirdness started on the second night. I was watching TV in the living room when Betty's head appeared from behind the wall to the hallway, and she stared at me intently. She started muttering these strange, faint noises. "Betty, you okay?" I asked. She groaned and disappeared back into the hallway. I immediately got on the phone with Kathy and asked if there was something wrong with Betty. Kathy said there was nothing wrong with her as far as she knew, though she only met her a week ago. When I told her about what Kathy just did, she was surprised. The next day I ran into Kathy cooking eggs in the kitchen. She said good morning, and I asked her if she was okay last night. She seemed confused what I was referring to, and I mentioned the way she was staring at me and making those noises. She claimed she had no recollection of it. All I could chalk it up to in my head was some kind of psychotic break. Fast forwarding through normal, unnecessary fluff, I was laying in my bed on my laptop with the light off. There was a knock at my bedroom door. I muted my laptop and heard the same moaning and groaning sounds of Betty from the night before. Quite frankly, I was uncomfortable with going out there, but this confirmed that something was definitely wrong with this woman. She kept knocking. It wouldn't stop. But the door was unlocked. If something was really wrong, I figured she'd come in. I really think the knocking and moaning went on for a full minute before I heard her walk away. It seemed these little episodes of hers would only happen at night. I almost wanted to be able to lock the door because it was kind of creepy actually, but the door had no lock. But she left, so I was okay to go to sleep now. I woke up expecting it to be like 9 a.m., but it was pitch black. I looked at my clock and it was 1:30 a.m. What I was woken up by became clear when there was a creak in the floor in the room. I saw a figure standing at the edge of my bed in the dark. "Becky?" I said. I heard the familiar groaning sounds again. I flipped on the lamp next to my bed, and there she was. This 60-something-year-old woman, with her long graying hair all disheveled, looking like a half-awake psycho. But really, the first thing I noticed was the large knife in her hand. I screamed a horrific scream as I curled up in the corner of my bed, expecting her to attack or do something. But she just kept making her strange sounds. Then she left the room. I ran to shut the door and block it with the dresser. I tried calling Kathy, but she was obviously asleep. I had to make it through the night, and it was a long 6 hours before the sun came up. I called Kathy at 8 and explained everything, and then I told her she needed to evict Betty immediately. She couldn't believe it, but she still apologized and said she'd be over that day. Kathy came to speak to Betty. She couldn't just evict her right away without a notice, though, and the eviction process takes months. So Kathy told me it was best if I just left the apartment and found somewhere else to live while she dealt with Betty. Betty apologized and said she had no recollection of any of this stuff happening. After Kathy and I did some research, we determined Betty most likely had a severe case of sundowning syndrome, which causes people to become confused or aggressive late in the day when the sun goes down. It's really terrifying knowing in whatever confused state of mind she was in, she likely had the intention of coming into my room and stabbing me for whatever reason.